Every hurricane season begins the same way, with a forecast. But no two seasons are ever exactly alike. The number of storms may change, the forecast may evolve, but one thing never does. It only takes one storm to change everything. Tonight, we'll show you what forecasters across the region are watching, why a quieter forecast doesn't necessarily mean a safer season, and what every Bahamian should be doing now, not when a hurricane is already on the map. This is RTV Presents Storm Navigator 2026, and it starts right now. Good evening and welcome to our special report on the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. I'm your host, Jasmine Brown, with meteorologist Greg Thompson. Hi, Greg.
Yeah, good evening, Jasmine. We've got quite a show for you tonight.
Well, we sure do. And each year, hurricane season brings new forecasts, new questions, and new concerns. But while we can't control the weather, we can control how prepared we are before the next storm develops.
Yeah, and that's what it's really all about tonight. We'll take a look at this year's forecast, what we're expecting across the Atlantic, but we'll separate fact from fiction, explain what the forecast really means for the Bahamas, and help you to understand the practical steps you can take to protect your family.
We'll also hear from emergency management officials, the Bahamas Red Cross, regional climate experts, and Bahamian sustainability advocate Reagan Russell, as we explore how resilience is about more than getting through one hurricane season. It's about preparing for the future.
Yeah, and whether the season produces fewer storms or more, our message remains the same. Preparation should never depend on the forecast.
And now, Greg, before we dive in, I want to point out that preparations are already well underway here at home. On July 16th, emergency response agencies from across the country came together for a large-scale disaster preparedness exercise designed to test coordination, communication, and response before the next storm.
Because we're now moving from just a reactive response thought process. This is what we call proactivity in action.
That's Managing Director of the DRM, Aaron Sargent, explaining the mantra for the annual event. He noted that the exercise has evolved over the years, transitioning from desktop drills to a command post that includes the construction of physical structures.
The injection for this event was that the Royal Bahamas Defense Force received a request to feed 60 shelterees. So we wanted to test the speed, the skill, and to close any loopholes that may exist.
This simulation involves the construction of the flex kitchen or field kitchen by officers of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Lead mechanic for the RBDF, Lathan Bastian, says establishing the structure took them 1.5 hours. But in a crisis situation, the field kitchen represents only one component of deployment.
To set up the entire city, which is tents, heads, shower, man-made shelters. We have that set up along with the flex kitchen. The entire process will take 3 hours.
Bastian asserts that in times of crisis, execution can become tedious. However, he says they're ready. Reporting for Our News, I'm Danielle Miller.
And as you've just seen, preparing for hurricane season doesn't begin with a forecast. It begins well in advance. Now that we've seen how the Bahamas is getting ready, let's take a closer look at the season itself. Meteorologist Greg Thompson is at the weather wall. Greg, how is this season being summed up?
Well, in comparison to last year, we did have an average or just above average season. This one is expected to be just below average, and the numbers are out. NOAA has the numbers for this Atlantic season at 8 to 14 named storms, 3 to 6 of those becoming hurricanes, 1 to 3 major storms, and that's category 3 or stronger. Colorado states, these are two agencies that we take the numbers from, 13 named storms, 6 of those becoming hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, averages over the 30-year period, 14, 7, and 3. And of course, with Colorado State, the new numbers are out. They actually downgraded. They're expecting 9 named storms, and of those 6 hurricanes, they actually expect 4 of them to become hurricanes and 1 major hurricane. So the numbers are actually trending down for this season. The factors in play right now, we do have the Saharan, the El Nino in the Pacific, very warm water mass moving across the Pacific. That's going to help to produce quite a bit of wind shear across the Atlantic, and that's going to help to limit the formation of these storms. We also have across the Atlantic some warm waters should help to form some storms, but the Gulf of Mexico remains a very warm area, and that's where we're seeing most of the activity right now for the early part of the season. And then the Saharan dust, that's playing a major part in helping to keep these storms at bay. Of course, these systems will continue to affect the season as the season progresses. Jasmine?
And with that, Greg, I want to move to the already published storm names. Here now are the first 11: Arthur, Bertha, Cristobal, Dolly, Edward, and Faye.
Then there's Gonzalo, Hannah, Isais, Josephine, and Kyle. Now remember, when it comes to hurricanes, not all threats are equal. Many people prepare for strong winds, but in the Bahamas, water poses one of the biggest dangers. Let's talk about what you need to know for the upcoming hurricane season. Knowing your risk, of course, we will be talking about, as the season goes on, threats from the storm, including storm surge, flooding from heavy rain, strong winds, and severe thunderstorms. Determine if you live in a flood-prone zone or flood-prone area. Determine whether your home is structurally sound. And when in doubt, locate your nearest storm shelter, and of course, evacuate inland if you are told to do so to higher ground if coastal areas are under a storm surge threat. Jasmine?
Definitely some really good advice and tips there, Greg. Thanks so much. And if there's one lesson the Caribbean has learned, it's that no island prepares alone. Long before a storm threatens our shores, countries across the region are already working together. That's exactly what happened on June 2nd when regional disaster officials gathered to discuss the season ahead.
The Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, SEDEMA, shared its outlook for the season. With 12 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and only 2 major hurricanes forecasted. Executive Director of SEDEMA, Elizabeth Riley, says that does not mean the region is in the clear.
We also expect that this can result in intense rainfall events, which could create extremely high flood and flash flood risks across many areas in the Caribbean.
Riley also warned of extreme heat conditions expected later this summer.
With more frequent heat waves, warmer daytime and nighttime temperatures will result in increased heat stress.
She said SEDEMA is now focusing heavily on improving its response and recovery efforts.
Supporting early recovery planning, improving the use of damage and needs information for recovery, and encouraging recovery approaches that reduce future risk.
When Storm Navigator continues, we'll reveal the remaining names for the season. Then we'll take you inside the Bahamas Red Cross as it explains its disaster response across the islands. Plus, a conversation with Bahamian sustainability advocate Reagan Russell on why climate resilience isn't just about weathering the next storm. We've got that and more when Storm Navigator continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to Storm Navigator, the 2026 Atlantic Hurricane Special. I'm your host, Jasmine Brown. Thanks for sticking with us as we help you navigate this season together. And before the break, we shared the first half of this year's Atlantic hurricane names. Now here are the remaining names for this season, beginning with Leah, Marco, Nana, Omar, Paulette, and Renee.
Yes, and rounding out this year's list, we have Sally, Teddy, Vicky, and Wilfred. And that completes the names for this year's season. We hope that you won't hear many of these names over the coming months. History has shown us, though, that it only takes one storm to make a season we'll never forget.
And Greg, we spent a lot of time talking about this season itself, but for the people watching at home, what is the most important question and the simplest one? What should we be doing right now?
That's exactly right, Jasmine. That's where everybody's focus should be right now. The best time to prepare isn't when a hurricane is on its way. It's long before one ever develops. And getting started may be easier than you think. Let's take a look at a few of the basics every family should have in place before the season reaches its peak. Of course, you should be developing a hurricane plan well in advance, and that includes an evacuation plan as well. Assemble disaster supplies that includes food, water, batteries, charger, radio, and cash. Get an insurance coverage checkup and make sure you have all your documents and your possessions in place. Create a communication plan with handwritten lists of contacts, and of course, strengthen your home.
Some really good advice and a really good and thorough checklist there, Greg. And when that one storm does strike, preparation is only part of the story. The moments that follow often depend on the people and organizations ready to respond.
The Bahamas Red Cross Society is moving more of its disaster response operations outside of the capital.
Once we get the physical buildings up and running, each of those buildings will have warehousing capacity. They will have administrative capacity so that we can actually be able to send supplies to the islands well ahead of a storm coming in.
Sumner says having resources already on the islands will cut down on response time and give local volunteers the tools they need to help their communities immediately.
So it's going to require a lot more effort now because apart from managing headquarters in Nassau, the Grand Bahamas Center, Abaco, we now have to manage effectively over 16 islands across the country. So our workload has increased exponentially.
Now, Sumner says the Red Cross will use the interim Central Council meeting to measure the progress. Reporting for Our News, I'm Delvado Emmanuel.
The work of organizations like the Bahamas Red Cross can make a big difference after a storm. But one of the most important things you can do is ensure your family has all the supplies you'll need to get through the first few days on your own. And Greg, we hear the phrase emergency kit every hurricane season, but what should every Bahamian actually have in one?
Yes, Jasmine, that's a great question because an emergency kit isn't just something you throw together when a storm is already on the way. It's something you should prepare before a hurricane season reaches its peak. And talking about an emergency kit, here are some of the things that you should have in place. 3+ days of food and water per person per household. Also battery-powered radio. A first aid kit in case you have an emergency. And any necessary prescriptions if you are on medication. Flashlights, extra batteries, and hygiene items. And of course, very important documents in a secured waterproof container. Remember, after a major hurricane, power and communications and even access to stores may be limited for several days.
Thanks so much for that, Greg. And for those of you at home, the more prepared you are with an emergency kit today, the less you'll have to worry about when a storm is approaching.
Yes, and it's one of the simplest steps you can take now to make a difficult situation a little easier later.
And it's interesting, Greg, because so much of what we've talked about tonight comes back to one idea, being ready. But lately, we've been hearing another word just as often, resilience. It's become a major part of the conversation, especially here in the Bahamas. So what does resilience really look like? Joining us now to help answer those questions is Bahamian sustainability advocate Reagan Russell. Reagan, welcome to Storm Navigator.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I want to ask you a few things here because we do have an expert next to me. We spend a lot of time talking about hurricane preparedness, but you often talk about resilience. What's the difference?
When I think of resilience planning, I really think of the long term. And so not just how do we make it out of the storm, but how do our communities continue to grow and prosper even after the storm has made landfall.
A really important point. Now, when people hear climate resilience, they sometimes think it's just about the environment, but how does it affect the everyday Bahamian?
Yeah, I think that something that really has drawn me to this field has been really explaining to people how humans and the environment really always interact. There's always that constant sometimes conflict. And so a way that I like to explain to people when looking at it, hey, resilience can be in the form of, for example, solar panels. And so making sure that we always have access to electricity. And so not just relying simply on the power plants, but having distributed forms of electricity. And so having those interconnections. And so, yeah, resilience oftentimes has to do with just the little inconveniences that we have throughout the day. Power cutting off, flooding in the streets, things like that.
Okay, and what are some of the practical solutions or even technologies that could help make the Bahamas more resilient?
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of nature-based solutions when it comes to climate change, especially hurricanes. One of the biggest ones that I always talk about is just wetlands and mangroves. And so a lot of people may not know, but mangroves and wetlands play a really big part when it comes to helping to break down the storm surge during hurricanes. And so things like that, also making sure that there's a lot of permeable ground so that, when it rains a lot, the water doesn't just sit on top of, for example, asphalt or cement, but it actually can absorb into the water.
Okay, and I want to bring Greg into the conversation. Greg, is there anything that Reagan mentioned just now that stands out to you?
Yeah, the wetlands and the mangroves. We want to just make sure let the public know, as well as the leaders, what we can do to help to protect our wetlands. And of course, we do have another question for you. Young people, you've been passionate about getting young Bahamians involved in all of this activity. Why is that so important?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with your first question. So I would just say that coalition building, coming together as people, young Bahamians, but all Bahamians, honestly, and just making sure that our voices are heard in an organized manner. And so building groups, and then once we have organized, have our goals, actually going forth to people in power and expressing what we want to see.
Well, I think we need to do more to protect our wetlands, because it seems as though we're losing a lot of them to new development. Jasmine?
Now, Reagan, if you were to remember just one thing from this conversation, what would it be?
That's a really good question. I would just say I would like to remind a lot of the young listeners, young viewers of our agency and just the power that we have as young people. When we look outside of the Bahamas at some of the major movements that have happened, for example, civil rights in the United States, or the fight to end apartheid government in South Africa. Those were really led by young folks. And so just reminding young people to look out and see, if it was able to be done over there, we can do it here. And even in the Bahamas, like for example, Sir Lyndon Pinling, when he became prime minister, he was in his 30s. That's super young. And so just reminding ourselves that we have the power, we have the agency, and we have the energy.
Thanks so much for all that amazing information, Reagan. I told you before we started the show that I just love your name. It's the same name as my daughter. And you are so knowledgeable, and we thank you for joining us on the show today.
So thank you for having me.
And as we just learned in our conversation, resilience looks different for everyone. But one thing is true for all of us: the best time to prepare is long before a storm is in the forecast. One important part of that preparation is making sure your home, your business, and your finances are properly protected. And that means understanding your insurance coverage before you ever need to use it.
Nagico Insurance Territory Head Anton Boleg says it only takes one storm to make landfall.
Continue to prepare as normal for storms.
For homeowners, having the right insurance coverage can make the difference between a quick recovery and a financial setback after a major storm. Boleg says one of the biggest mistakes property owners make is insuring their home based on its market value instead of the actual cost to rebuild it.
A building that you would have built 5 years, 10 years from now, just because of inflation, their sums insured should be adjusted upwards because it would cost more to rebuild that home.
And while many Bahamians remained concerned about the cost of insurance, Boleg says there is some good news.
In previous years, the lack of available capacity for homeowners insurance would have been the major driving force for the fluctuation in rates, but that's kind of settled in now, so they should be able to enjoy stabilized pricing.
As insurers continue to stress preparedness, they're urging homeowners to review your policy, check to make sure that you have the appropriate coverage, and document the current state of your property with photos. And as for homeowners, you can still purchase insurance during the hurricane season, except for when there's a storm or active hurricane warning in effect. Reporting for Our News, I'm Chinasa Houghton.
Knowing what's in your insurance policy is just one way to protect what matters most. And when Storm Navigator returns, we'll show you how one local company is helping Bahamians build homes designed to stand up to whatever the hurricane season brings. Storm Navigator is back in a moment. Welcome back to RTV Presents Storm Navigator, the 2026 Hurricane Special. Thanks for keeping our company tonight. And as we've heard throughout the program, protecting your home doesn't begin when a hurricane is approaching. It starts long before a storm is ever in the forecast. And as you know, Greg, after every major hurricane, one of the first things people ask is, when is the power coming back? Until that happens, generators become a lifeline for so many families.
They certainly do, Jasmine, and I remember Michelle that came through and I was without power for almost a week. But when generators aren't used the right way, they can quickly go from being a convenience to becoming a serious danger. The good news is that with a few simple precautions, you can keep your family safe while keeping the lights on.
Widespread power outages across New Providence sparking a sharp increase in demand for backup power. Business Development Manager at Total Services, Barry Nairn, says generator sales are up by at least 25%, adding that residents aren't just responding to recent blackouts. They're preparing for what could be an active hurricane season.
The calls are there. It's right now, it's kind of demanding for us to go ahead and keep up.
Nairn says many are even turning to commercial banks to finance their purchase. Nairn warns that waiting only makes it costlier and that planning ahead is key, especially as the hurricane season drives the spike. Even when fuel prices increased recently, he says the demand for generators remains strong. As the hurricane season continues and power outages remain a concern, suppliers expect demand for generators to stay high. Their advice is simple: plan ahead, purchase early, and don't wait until the next blackout or approaching storm to secure backup power. Reporting for Our News, I'm Evelyn Ferguson.
All right, some important information there, especially at a time when so many families depend on generators after a storm. Greg, it's a reminder that staying safe isn't just about what you do before a hurricane. It also means making smart decisions after it's passed.
Exactly, Jasmine. Whether you're preparing for a storm, riding one out, or beginning the recovery, there are a few simple things that everyone should keep in mind to help protect themselves and their families. Let's take a look. Staying protected during a storm or a hurricane, shelter in place in your designated safe space. Have a way to get weather alerts and forecast updates, such as a battery-operated radio and data packages for your phone. Keep in mind that the impacts can be felt well before tropical storm or hurricane force winds affect your area. Listen to your local officials, such as the Disaster Risk Management Authority and the Department of Meteorology, and avoid travel unless ordered to evacuate.
Thanks, Greg. We'll take one final break. When Storm Navigator returns, we'll show you how building stronger today could make all the difference when the next hurricane comes. Then Greg shares the critical steps to take once a storm is passed. And before we say goodnight, one final message about preparing today to protect tomorrow. Stay with us. You're watching Storm Navigator, the 2026 Hurricane Special. Thanks for keeping our company tonight. Well, so far we've seen just how important it is to have a plan and why now's the time to stock up, know your evacuation route, and stay connected with trusted sources like us. Tonight, we've talked about the forecast, making a plan, protecting your family, and staying safe before, during, and after a hurricane. You know, Greg, during our conversation with Reagan Russell, one thing that really stayed with me was the idea that resilience isn't something you build after a storm. It's something you invest in long before one ever arrives.
That's exactly right, Jasmine. And one of the biggest investments we can make is in the places we call home. Every hurricane season reminds us that the way we build can make a real difference, not just in how home weathers a storm, but in how exactly or quickly family can recover afterwards.
And that's exactly where our final story takes us.
What you need after you're recovering from a storm is something that's resilient, something that is strong.
That's Heroic Concrete Commercial Sales Coordinator Imani Dames explaining how a foundational product like Heroic Concrete is vital to securing your home or business during a storm. The right concrete products protect against storms by fortifying resistance to extreme winds, heavy rain, and flying debris. And with the Bahamas positioned directly in what's become known as the hurricane belt, doing all you can to protect your property is key. And of course, proximity matters. Getting a product locally can cut down on recovery time.
It's local, so it's easier to acquire.
The 100% Bahamian-owned and operated company opened its doors back in 2023. Since then, its Freeport-based manufacturing plant has become known for delivering high-quality, reliable concrete products across the country. And when it comes to ensuring their products are storm-ready,
we ensure that we do the requisite testing. We have quality control over our concrete products, ensuring that the mix designs are approved and just right, ensuring that the strength is correct on each of our mix designs. And we have testing throughout the year to ensure that what we provide in our products are quality and consistent for our clients.
And that story really brings everything we've talked about tonight full circle. Whether it's putting together an emergency kit, reviewing your insurance, or building a stronger home, it all comes back to making those decisions before they're ever put to the test. But once the storm is past, that's when a lot of people let their guard down. Greg, what are some of the most important things we should all remember during those first few hours and, in fact, days?
You know, Jasmine, that's a great question. The danger doesn't always end when the winds die down. Floodwaters, down power lines, damaged buildings, and even the cleanup itself can present serious risk. So before you head outside or begin putting your life back together, here are a few of the important steps every family should keep in mind. Let's take a look. Remain in place until the all clear is given for your island, and that should come from Disaster Risk Management Authority. Remain vigilant as hazards remain, such as floodwaters and down power lines, and of course people moving around. You don't know what is in those waters. Exercise caution during cleanup efforts. In the event of extended power outages, use your generators as we just spoke about, and open the windows for ventilation. Help and communications may not be immediately available after a storm. Utilize your preparedness plan. And talking about the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season, here are the numbers once again. NOAA has the number of named storms at 8 to 14, 3 to 6 of them becoming hurricanes, major hurricanes 1 to 3. Colorado State, 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes, and I want to update these numbers because Colorado State actually has new numbers put out. They have updated theirs to 9 named storms, 4 of those becoming hurricanes, and 1 major hurricane expected for the season. So the season is kind of winding down or becoming more quiet. And of course, the averages over the last 30 years, 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes.
And you know, Greg, when we began tonight, we talked about the forecast and what this hurricane season could bring. But after everything we've covered, one thing's clear. Preparing for hurricane season isn't about fear. It's about making smart decisions before they're ever put to the test.
That's exactly right, Jasmine. We can't control where the next storm will go or how active the season will be, but we can control how we prepare for the season, whether it's in building an emergency kit, protecting your home, reviewing your insurance coverage, or simply having a family plan. The time to act is before a storm is ever on the horizon.
And that's the message we hope you'll all take with you tonight. Preparation isn't one big decision. It's a series of small ones that can make a big difference when it matters the most. So talk with your family, review your plans, check your supplies, and if you've been putting it off, let tonight be the reason you get started.
Because at the end of the day, the strongest protection isn't found in the forecast, it's found in your preparation.
On behalf of meteorologist Greg Thompson and the entire RTV team, thank you for joining us for Storm Navigator 2026. I'm Jasmine Brown. Until next time, have a safe hurricane season and good night.